She introduced her boss at our barbecue as the smartest man she knows. The words hung in the humid July air like smoke from my grill, and I felt something shift inside my chest. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. Like when you finally hear the name of a song that's been stuck in your head for weeks. I'm Cole Redding, and I've been married to Elaine for 8 years. I run a small security systems business. Cameras, alarms, the works. People underestimate me because I wear work boots and drive a pickup truck, but that's their mistake. I've learned that being underestimated is actually an advantage in this world. "Cole, honey, come meet Garrett Waverly," Elaine called from across our backyard, her voice carrying that particular pitch she used when she wanted to impress someone. She stood next to a man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one that said Grill Sergeant that Elaine bought me last Christmas, and walked over. The backyard was full of people, neighbors, some of Elaine's co-workers, a few of my old friends. Mrs. Donnelly from next door was already working on her second wine cooler and eyeing the potato salad like she was calculating calories. "Garrett, this is my husband Cole," Elaine said, her hand resting on Waverly's arm just a second too long. "Cole, this is Garrett Waverly, the CEO of Waverly Innovations. He's honestly the smartest man I know." Waverly extended his hand and I took it. His grip was firm, confident, the handshake of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. His smile was perfect, the kind you practice in mirrors. He shook my hand like he'd already won something, like this whole interaction was just a formality before collecting his prize. I smiled back. "Nice to meet you, Garrett. Elaine's told me so much about you." That was a lie, of course. Elaine had barely mentioned her new boss, which should have been my first clue. When your wife stops talking about work, she's either miserable or hiding something. Elaine wasn't miserable. "The pleasure's mine," Waverly said, still gripping my hand. "Elaine speaks very highly of you, says you're quite the entrepreneur." "I do all right," I said, finally extracting my hand. "Just installed a new system at the Marriott downtown. 32 cameras, motion sensors, the works. Amazing what you can see when you know where to look." Something flickered across Waverly's face. Too quick for most people to catch, but I'd spent years reading faces through security monitors. Fear, maybe, or recognition. "That sounds fascinating," he said, but his attention had already shifted back to Elaine. "I should probably find my wife. She said she'd be here around 3. I glanced at my watch. It was 3:30. "Traffic, probably," Elaine said quickly. "You know how Saturday afternoons can be." But I was watching Waverly's face, and I saw something else there. Annoyance. The look of a man whose carefully laid plans had hit a snag. "Let me get you both a drink," I said. "Beer? Wine? I've got some of that fancy imported stuff Elaine likes." "Beer sounds perfect," Waverly said, loosening up now that we were away from the topic of his missing wife. I walked back to the cooler, my mind working. 3 months ago, Elaine had started working late. Not every night, but often enough. She'd come home smelling different. Not perfume exactly, but soap that wasn't ours. Hotel soap has a particular scent, industrial and clean. I should know. I'd installed security systems in half the hotels in town. 2 months ago, she'd started taking her phone everywhere. Bathroom, shower, grocery store. Before that, she'd leave it charging on the kitchen counter while she did laundry or worked in the garden. Now it was glued to her hand like a life support device. 1 month ago, I'd hired Rick Morales. Rick and I went way back, high school, then a few years working construction before I started my business and he became a private investigator. Rick looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts, crooked nose from a bar fight in his 20s, gray hair that never stayed combed, clothes that suggested he'd gotten dressed in the dark. But Rick had a talent for becoming invisible, and he had a camera that could shoot clear pictures from 3 blocks away. I'd given Rick simple instructions. Follow Elaine on the nights she worked late. Document everything. No confrontations, no risks, just facts. Rick was good at facts. I popped open 2 beers and walked back to where Elaine and Waverly stood near the rose bushes. They weren't touching, but they stood close enough that I could see the invisible thread connecting them. It's funny how obvious these things become once you start looking for them. "Here you go," I said, handing Waverly his beer. "So, Garrett, what exactly does Waverly Innovations innovate?" He launched into a practice spiel about software solutions and market disruption, the kind of corporate speak that sounds impressive but means nothing. I nodded at appropriate intervals while watching Elaine watch him. She hung on every word like he was revealing the secrets of the universe. The smartest man she knows. I excused myself to check the burgers, but really I needed a moment to think. The grill gave me something to do with my hands while my brain processed what I was seeing. Elaine laughed at something Waverly said. Not her real laugh, but the one she used at dinner parties when she wanted to seem sophisticated. "Those smell incredible," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Jonas, my employee and the closest thing I had to a little brother. Jonas was 26, built like a linebacker, and had a smile that could charm paint off a fence. He also had a black belt in something I couldn't pronounce, and a talent for showing up exactly when I needed him. "Thanks," I said. "You bring the thing?" Jonas patted his jacket pocket. "Got it right here. You sure about this, Cole? Once we do this, there's no going back." I flipped a burger and watched the flames dance. "There's already no going back, Jonas. This just makes it official." Across the yard, Elaine was introducing Waverly to our neighbors. He charmed them effortlessly, the way successful men always do. Mrs. Donnelly actually giggled when he complimented her potato salad. Even my buddy Tom from down the street seemed impressed by whatever story Waverly was telling. That's the thing about charm. It works on everyone except the person who's been watching you practice it on their wife. My phone buzzed. Text message from Rick. "Package delivered. ETA 30 minutes. I smiled and closed the phone. Rick had done good work over the past 3 months. 18 hotel visits, all documented, lunch meetings that lasted until evening, text messages that would make a sailor blush, credit card receipts for jewelry I'd never seen Elaine wear, the smartest man she knows. I started pulling burgers off the grill, arranging them on a platter. People began lining up with their plates, chatting about the weather and weekend plans, normal suburban Saturday afternoon stuff, the kind of scene that looks perfect from the outside. "Cole, these are amazing," said Megan, Elaine's best friend and partner in crime. Megan had been encouraging Elaine's late nights for months, covering for her, probably living vicariously through her affair. "You've really outdone yourself." "Thanks, Megan. I like to think I'm smarter than I look." She laughed, missing the edge in my voice entirely. Megan was the type who thought she was the smartest person in every room, which made her useful to people like Elaine and dangerous to people like me. "Elaine's so lucky to have you," Megan continued. "Not every husband would be so understanding about her work schedule." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, meeting her eyes. Crystal clear, actually. Something in my tone made her step back, but before she could respond, a commotion near the back gate caught everyone's attention. A woman had entered the yard, tall, elegant, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my truck, and she carried a manila envelope like it contained state secrets. The conversation died as she walked across the grass with the measured steps of someone who'd learned to command attention without raising her voice. I recognized her from the photos Rick had shown me. Nora Waverly, Garrett's wife of 15 years. She walked straight to where her husband stood with Elaine, ignoring the curious stares of 30 people. Her face was calm, composed, the expression of someone who'd had 3 months to prepare for this moment. "Hello, darling," she said to Garrett, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet yard. "Sorry I'm late. I had to pick something up." She held up the manila envelope, and I saw Garrett's face go white. "Nora," he said, his voice strangled. "I wasn't sure you were coming." "Oh, I wouldn't miss this for the world," she said, then turned to Elaine with a smile that could freeze fire. You must be Elaine. I've heard so much about you. Elaine managed a weak smile. Mrs. Waverly, how nice to finally meet you. The pleasure's all mine, Nora said, then looked around the yard at all the watching faces. I hope you don't mind, but I brought some photos to share. I thought everyone might find them interesting. She opened the envelope and began spreading photographs across our picnic table like she was dealing cards. Even from the grill, I could see what they showed. Garrett and Elaine entering a hotel, leaving a hotel, kissing in a parking garage, holding hands in a restaurant across town. The silence stretched until Mrs. Donnelly dropped her wine cooler. These were taken over the past 3 months, Nora announced, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. Along with these text messages, credit card receipts, and calendar entries showing 18 separate hotel visits charged to the company account. Elaine found her voice. This is some kind of setup. Those photos could be anyone. Could they? Nora pulled out her phone and began reading. March 15th, 2:17 p.m. Can't wait to taste you again. March 22nd, 11:43 a.m. Your husband's working late tonight. Perfect timing. April 3rd. Stop, Garrett said, but his voice was barely a whisper. April 3rd, Nora continued, 4:56 p.m. I love how you make me feel like the smartest man alive. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. I saw Tom's mouth fall open, watched Megan take a step away from Elaine like she was contagious. Mrs. Donnelly was already pulling out her phone, probably texting the neighborhood group chat. Nora, please, Garrett said, reaching for her arm. Let's discuss this privately. She stepped away from his touch. Privately? Like the way you discussed your marriage vows privately with my employee? Oh yes, Elaine, I know exactly what you are. An employee, my employee, since I own 49% of Waverly Innovations. I had to admire her style. Nora Waverly knew how to work a crowd. These could be fabricated, Elaine said desperately, but her voice lacked conviction. Digital photos can be manipulated. Could they? Nora reached into the envelope again and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Because I also have subpoenaed phone records, credit card statements, and a sworn affidavit from Garrett's assistant, who was kind enough to provide access to his calendar in exchange for protection from the wrongful termination lawsuit she'll be filing Monday morning. Garrett's legs seemed to give out. He sat heavily on one of our patio chairs, his head in his hands. 18 hotel visits, Nora continued, consulting her papers. Always the same hotel, always the same room. The Marriott downtown, room 417. Charged to the company account as client meetings. Funny thing about that room, it has an excellent view of the security office, doesn't it, Cole? All eyes turned to me, and I felt the moment I'd been waiting for finally arrive. Actually, I said, walking over to join the group around the picnic table. It has an excellent view of the parking garage. That's where most of these photos were taken. Amazing resolution on those new cameras. Understanding dawned on several faces at once. Tom started to grin. Mrs. Donnelly's eyes went wide. Megan looked like she was going to be sick. You see, I continued, when I installed the security system at the Marriott 3 months ago, I made sure to position the cameras for optimal coverage. Professional habit. You never know what you might need to see. Elaine stared at me like I'd grown a second head. Cole, what did you do? Me? I didn't do anything except my job. Install cameras, monitor security, protect property. Speaking of which, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded set of papers. I think these belong to you. I handed her the divorce papers, already filed, already served. Her hands shook as she unfolded them. You wanted the smartest man you know, I said quietly, so only she could hear. Maybe you should have looked a little closer to home. The crowd was buzzing now, voices rising as the full scope of what they were witnessing sank in. This wasn't just adultery, this was a coordinated takedown, planned and executed with military precision. Garrett's phone rang, then again, then a third time. "You should probably answer that," Nora said helpfully. "I imagine the board of directors has some questions about your use of company resources." Garrett fumbled for his phone with shaking hands. "Hello?" Even from where I stood, I could hear the shouting from the other end. Garrett's face went from white to green. "Monday morning," he said weakly. "Yes, sir, I understand." He ended the call and looked at his wife with something approaching desperation. "Nora, please, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be—" "Oh, but it does," she said, smiling for the first time since she'd arrived. "You see, darling, remember that prenuptial agreement you insisted I sign? The one that protected your assets in case of divorce? Well, it has a morality clause. Section 12, subsection 4. In the event of proven adultery, the offending party forfeits all claim to marital assets and assumes full responsibility for legal fees." She gestured to the photos spread across the table. "I'd say this qualifies as proof, wouldn't you?" The silence that followed was broken by the sound of car doors slamming. Elaine was gathering up her purse, her face a mask of humiliation and rage. "This isn't over," she said to me, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually," I said, "it is. Your things are packed and in your car. I changed the locks this morning. Your accounts have been frozen pending the divorce proceedings. And just so we're clear, I've documented every penny you've spent over the past 8 years, every loan from your parents, every credit card charge, every girls' night out that lasted until 3 a.m. My lawyer finds it all very interesting." She opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to realize that 30 people were watching her every move. Instead, she turned and walked toward the gate with as much dignity as she could manage. Garrett started to follow her, but Nora's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't," she said. "Your car keys are in my purse, and I have a restraining order being filed Monday morning. I suggest you call a cab." He stood there for a moment, looking around at the faces watching him, some shocked, some disgusted, some frankly entertained. Then he pulled out his phone and walked toward the front of the house. The crowd began to disperse, people gathering in small groups to process what they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Donnelly was already holding court near the roses, explaining to anyone who'd listen how she'd always suspected something was off about Elaine's work schedule. Nora began collecting her photos and papers, moving with the same calm efficiency she'd shown throughout the entire confrontation. "Thank you," she said to me quietly, "for the evidence, for the timing, for everything. Your friend Rick does excellent work." "Rick's thorough," I agreed. "How long have you known?" "About the affair? 3 months? About your investigation? Since last week. Rick's good, but he's not invisible. My security team noticed him following Garrett." "And you didn't stop him?" She smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "Why would I? He was doing exactly what I needed done. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your friend." She finished packing up her evidence and stood to leave. "The house will be empty by Wednesday. Garrett's assets are frozen as of this morning. I have excellent lawyers. If you ever decide to expand your security business, call me. I'll be needing new management for Waverly Innovations." After she left, I found myself alone in the backyard with Jonas and the remains of the barbecue. The burgers were cold, the beer was warm, and the potato salad was starting to look questionable in the heat. "Well," Jonas said, starting to stack plates. "That was something." "That was justice," I corrected. "There's a difference." "You feel better?" I considered the question while I cleaned the grill. Did I feel better? Vindicated, certainly. Satisfied that the truth had finally come out. But better? That was more complicated. "I feel like myself again," I said finally. "For the first time in months, I feel like myself." Jonas nodded like he understood. "So what now?" "Now we clean up the mess and move on. Monday morning, I've got 3 new installations scheduled. Tuesday, I'm meeting with a lawyer about expanding the business. Wednesday, I start the rest of my life." "And Elaine?" I looked around the empty yard, at the house I'd bought and paid for, at the life I'd built with my own hands. Elaine made her choice. She wanted the smartest man she knew. Turns out she was right. She just picked the wrong one. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that follows a storm. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, for the first time in months, without the weight of secrets pressing down on my chest. The coffee tasted better. The shower felt cleaner. Even my reflection looked different, sharper somehow, like someone had adjusted the focus. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails from people who'd heard about Saturday's barbecue. News travels fast in suburbia, especially news this good. The first call I returned was to Rick. "You beautiful bastard," he said, instead of hello. "I haven't seen a takedown that clean since the Carter divorce case in '98. "Just following the evidence," I said, pulling into the parking lot of my office. "Speaking of which, send me your final invoice. Include a bonus for timing." "Already did. And Cole, if you ever need anything at all, you call me. What you pulled off Saturday was art." The second call was from my lawyer, Janet Morrison. Janet looked like someone's grandmother, but fought like a Wolverine with a law degree. "I've reviewed the papers Nora Waverly's team filed," she said. "Clean as a whistle. Her husband's going to be lucky if he keeps his car. How's your situation looking?" "Elaine hasn't contested anything yet. I don't think she can afford to." "She can't. I ran her financials this morning. 3 credit cards maxed out, checking account overdrawn, no assets in her name. She's going to need to find work fast." "That might be difficult. I heard Waverly Innovations had some personnel changes." Janet's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Personnel changes. I like that. Yes, both she and Garrett Waverly were terminated this morning. Something about violating the company morality clause and misuse of corporate resources." I felt a warm satisfaction settle in my stomach. Shame about that. Terrible shame. Oh, and Cole, the house, the business, the retirement accounts, all clean. You did good work protecting your assets. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a moment, watching the morning traffic flow past. People heading to jobs they tolerated, marriages they'd settled for, lives they'd never quite chosen. I'd been one of them just a week ago. Now I felt like I'd woken up from a long, boring dream. Jonas was already at the office when I arrived, working on inventory for the Henderson installation. He looked up when I walked in, studying my face like he was checking for damage. "You sleep? Like a baby? You?" Like a grown man who watched his boss destroy 2 people with a barbecue and some photographs. "It was beautiful, Cole. Seriously. I'm thinking about taking notes for my memoirs." I laughed, and it felt good. When was the last time I'd really laughed? Months, probably. Maybe longer. "Don't get too excited. The real work starts now." "What do you mean?" I pulled out a folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Nora Waverly offered me a job Saturday, managing partner for the security division of Waverly Innovations. Turns out they're going to need new leadership. Jonas whistled low. "That's a big step up." "It's a big opportunity. Question is, you want to come with me?" "Are you kidding? After what I saw Saturday? I'd follow you into a volcano." We spent the morning going over the details. The Waverly contract would triple our revenue overnight, give us access to commercial clients we'd never dreamed of, and establish us as the premier security firm in the region. It was everything I'd worked toward for years, handed to me by the wife of the man who'd been sleeping with mine. Irony, I decided, was underrated. Around noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. Cole Redding. "Cole, it's Megan." Elaine's friend sounded like she'd been crying. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do." "Please, just 5 minutes. I'm at the coffee shop on Elm Street." I considered hanging up, but curiosity won. 5 minutes? The coffee shop was one of those places that tried too hard to be quirky. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, baristas with creative facial hair. Megan sat in a corner booth, looking like she'd aged 5 years since Saturday. Thank you for coming, she said as I sat down. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. She flinched. Cole, I want you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. When Elaine first told me about Garrett, I thought it was just a crush, harmless flirtation. When did she first tell you? January, right after the company party. She said he'd paid attention to her, made her feel special. I told her to be careful, but you also covered for her, lied for her, helped her sneak around. Megan's hand shook as she lifted her coffee cup. I thought she deserved to be happy. Your marriage seemed so routine, predictable. My marriage was stable. There's a difference. She said you never talked anymore, never did anything exciting. She felt invisible. I leaned back, studying her face. Megan was one of those women who lived through other people's drama because her own life was too boring to sustain her. Elaine's affair had been entertainment for her, a soap opera she could participate in without consequences. Except now, there were consequences. What do you want, Megan? I want to apologize. And I want you to know that what happened Saturday, it wasn't supposed to go like that. Elaine thought you didn't know. She thought she could end it quietly and save her marriage. She thought wrong. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. People are taking sides. It's getting ugly. I checked my watch. Time's up. Cole, wait. She grabbed my arm as I started to stand. She's staying at her sister's place. She's devastated. Maybe if you two could just talk. Talk about what? How she spent 8 months lying to my face. How she used our joint credit card to buy lingerie for another man. How she told him he was the smartest man she knew while I was grilling burgers for her friends. Megan released my arm like it had burned her. She made a mistake. She made a choice. Multiple choices over multiple months. And now she gets to live with the consequences. I stood to leave, then turned back. One more thing, Megan. If I find out you're still in contact with Garrett Waverly, if you're helping them coordinate their stories or plan some kind of comeback, I'll make Saturday look like a warm-up act. Understand? She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Good. Enjoy your coffee. I drove back to the office with the radio turned up loud, trying to wash the taste of that conversation out of my mouth. Some people, I reflected, never learned that actions have consequences. They went through life expecting other people to clean up their messes, to forgive their betrayals, to pretend their choices didn't matter. I wasn't one of those people. Jonas was on the phone when I walked in, taking notes on a legal pad. He held up one finger, finished the conversation, then grinned at me like he'd won the lottery. That was the Marriott. They want to expand their security system. Seems like someone's been asking questions about their current setup, and they want to make sure they're getting the best possible coverage. Someone's been asking questions? Insurance investigator. Apparently there's some question about whether certain activities in their parking garage might constitute a liability issue. I felt that warm satisfaction again. Terrible shame about that. Gets better. The investigator mentioned that the hotel's current security footage might be subpoenaed for an upcoming divorce proceeding. Management wants to make sure they're in full compliance with all legal requirements. And they called us because we installed the system, and because the investigator specifically mentioned that our work was exceptionally thorough and professionally executed. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a calculator. The Marriott contract, plus the Waverly deal, plus the 3 new residential installations we had scheduled, would put us ahead of projections by 6 months. Jonas, I said, I think we're going to need a bigger office. Already looking. There's a place on Industrial Drive, twice the space, better location. Owners motivated to deal. Set up a meeting. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. New clients, follow-up installations, contract negotiations, the kind of busy that felt good, productive, like building something instead of watching it fall apart. Around 5 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. Elaine's sister, Patricia. Cole, we need to talk. No, we don't. She's my sister. She's family. She was my wife. Past tense. What's your point? Patricia had always disliked me, thought Elaine had married beneath her station. She was a real estate agent who drove a BMW she couldn't afford and lived in a house that was mortgaged to the foundation, the kind of person who measured success by appearance rather than substance. My point is that you've humiliated her in front of the entire town. People are calling her names, crossing the street to avoid her. She can't even go to the grocery store without people staring. That's what happens when you cheat on your spouse with your boss at a company barbecue. People tend to remember that kind of thing. She made a mistake. She made a choice. And now she's living with it. Just like I'm living with mine. What choice? To destroy her life? I leaned back in my chair, watching Jonas pretend not to listen to my conversation. My choice was to find out the truth and act on it. Her choice was to lie to me for 8 months while she screwed around with a married man. Which one of us destroyed what, Patricia? She loved you, Cole. She still loves you. She loved the idea of me, the security, the stability, the house, the steady income. She just didn't love me enough to stay faithful. People make mistakes. Marriage is about forgiveness. Marriage is about trust. Without that, it's just 2 people sharing expenses. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could hear Elaine crying in the background. The sound should have affected me more than it did. 6 months ago, it would have broken my heart. Now it just sounded like someone learning that actions have consequences. She wants to come home, Cole. She wants to work things out. She doesn't have a home here anymore. I changed the locks. You can't just throw away 8 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away. She did. The moment she decided Garrett Waverly was more interesting than the man she married. So that's it? You're just going to move on like she never existed? I considered the question seriously. Was that what I was doing? Moving on like Elaine had never existed? Or was I moving on because she had existed, because I'd learned something important about the difference between the person I thought I'd married and the person she actually was? I'm going to move on like the marriage never existed, I said finally, because it turns out it didn't. What I thought was a marriage was actually just me being convenient while she figured out what she really wanted. Cole, tell her I said goodbye, Patricia, and tell her that the smartest thing she ever said was introducing me to Garrett Waverly. It opened my eyes to a lot of things. I hung up and sat in the quiet office, listening to the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic. Jonas had gone home, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the satisfaction of a day well spent. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This isn't over. I smiled and typed back, yes, it is. Then I blocked the number, locked up the office, and drove home to my empty house that felt more like home than it had in months. 2 weeks after the barbecue, I was installing a security system at the Riverside Country Club when I saw Garrett Waverly pumping gas at the station across the street. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out from the inside, rumpled clothes, unshaven face, the kind of defeated posture that comes from having your entire life dismantled in public. I finished mounting the camera and climbed down from the ladder, watching as he fumbled with his wallet at the pump. His BMW was gone, replaced by a 10-year-old Honda that had seen better decades. The mighty had fallen, and gravity was unforgiving. That him? Jonas asked, following my gaze. That's him. Looks rough. Looks appropriate. My phone rang. Nora Waverly, right on schedule. Cole, I'm calling with an update on our mutual friend. I'm listening. The divorce was finalized this morning. He gets to keep his clothes and his car. The Honda, not the BMW. Everything else is mine. The house, the business, the boat, the investment accounts. All of it. How's he taking it? About as well as you'd expect. His lawyer tried to argue emotional distress, claimed I orchestrated a public humiliation campaign. The judge wasn't sympathetic. I watched Garrett drive away in his Honda, heading toward the part of town where people lived paycheck to paycheck. It was going to be an adjustment for a man who'd spent his career looking down on people like me. What about employment prospects? Non-existent. Word travels fast in corporate circles. Sleeping with employees, misusing company resources, public scandal. He's radioactive. No one will touch him. Shame about that. Terrible shame. Oh, and Cole? I had lunch with your wife yesterday. That got my attention. Ex-wife. And where? The diner on Route 9. She's working there now, waitressing. Apparently, it's the only place that would hire her. I tried to picture Elaine in a waitress uniform, taking orders from the same people who'd watched her humiliation at my barbecue. The image was both pathetic and oddly satisfying. How did she seem? Bitter, angry, convinced that you somehow orchestrated the entire thing. She has some interesting theories about how you manipulated me into exposing their affair. Interesting how? She thinks you and I planned the whole thing together. That we've been working as a team to destroy her and Garrett. She's quite convinced of it, actually. I considered this. It wasn't entirely wrong. Nora and I had certainly benefited from each other's actions. But the idea that we'd conspired from the beginning was giving me more credit than I deserved. What did you tell her? I told her that some people are smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it presents itself, and some people are smart enough to create their own opportunities. After I hung up, Jonas and I finished the installation and drove back to our new office. The space on Industrial Drive was 3 times larger than our old place, with room for expansion and a conference room that actually impressed clients. Business was booming. Word of mouth from the Marriott job and the Waverly contract had generated more leads than we could handle. "Boss," Jonas said as we unloaded equipment, "we got a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that's standing in our parking lot." I looked up to see a familiar figure leaning against a blue sedan. Megan, looking like she'd been waiting for a while. "Take the equipment inside," I told Jonas. "I'll handle this." Megan straightened as I approached, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. She'd lost weight since the barbecue, and her clothes hung loose on her frame. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't. I thought we established that. Elaine's in bad shape, Cole. Really bad. She's working double shifts at the diner just to pay rent on a studio apartment. She's lost everything. She lost what she chose to lose. She's talking about leaving town, starting over somewhere else." I unlocked my truck and started loading tools into the bed. "Sounds like a plan. Is that what you want? To drive her away completely?" "What I want is for her to take responsibility for her choices and leave me alone. If that means leaving town, so be it." Megan stepped closer, and I could smell desperation on her like cheap perfume. "She still loves you, Cole. Despite everything, she still loves you. She loves the security I represented. She loves the life she had before she threw it away. She doesn't love me. She never did." "That's not true." I stopped loading tools and looked at her directly. "Megan, let me ask you something. In all the months you were covering for her affair, helping her lie to me, did she ever once express regret? Did she ever say she felt guilty about cheating on her husband?" Megan's silence was answer enough. "She didn't, did she? She was excited, happy, finally getting the attention she thought she deserved from a man she considered worthy of her time. The only thing she regrets now is getting caught." People change, Cole. People grow. Yes, they do. I've grown. I've learned that I deserve better than a wife who thinks I'm not smart enough to notice when she's lying to my face. I closed the tailgate and turned to face her fully. "Here's what's going to happen, Megan. You're going to go back to Elaine and tell her that this conversation never happened. You're going to stop carrying messages between us. And you're going to find yourself a hobby that doesn't involve managing other people's relationships." "And if I don't?" I smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then you'll discover that I'm much better at this game than you thought. And trust me, you don't want to play games with someone who's already won. She got in her car without another word. That evening, I was reviewing contracts in my home office when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser in my driveway. Officer Martinez stood on my porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Evening, Cole. Sorry to bother you." "No bother. What can I do for you?" "Got a complaint filed against you. Harassment, stalking, that sort of thing. I'm required to follow up." I stepped aside to let him in. Martinez and I went way back. I'd installed his home security system 2 years ago, and we'd shared a few beers over the project. "Who filed the complaint?" "Elaine Redding. Well, Elaine Morrison now, I guess. She's claiming you've been following her, intimidating her friends, making her life difficult." "Have you seen any evidence of that?" Martinez pulled out a notebook and flipped through it. "That's the thing, Cole. I've been asking around, checking into it. Far as I can tell, you haven't been within a mile of her since the divorce was finalized. Your neighbors say you've been home every night, working on your house. Your employees say you've been at the office or job sites every day. So why the visit?" "Because she's persistent, and because she's got some interesting theories about how you've been orchestrating things behind the scenes." I poured 2 cups of coffee and handed him one. "What kind of theories?" "She thinks you've been manipulating people against her, turning the whole town into your personal revenge squad. Says you've got some kind of network of spies and informants working to destroy her reputation." "That's quite a theory." "It is. Problem is, I can't find any evidence of it. What I can find is a woman who made some very public, very poor choices and is now dealing with the natural consequences." Martinez sipped his coffee and looked around my living room. I'd been redecorating since Elaine left. New furniture, new paint, new everything. The space felt lighter somehow, less cluttered with compromises. "Nice place," he said. "Looks different." "Feels different too." "I bet." "Cole, I've got to ask this officially. Have you had any contact with your ex-wife since the divorce was finalized?" "None whatsoever." "Have you asked anyone else to contact her on your behalf?" "No." "Have you taken any actions designed to harm her employment or housing situation?" "No. Her employment and housing situations are direct results of her own choices." Martinez made notes in his book. "That's what I figured. Look, between you and me, she's grasping at straws, trying to find someone to blame for the mess she made, but officially I had to follow up." "I understand. Unofficially, you might want to be extra careful for a while. Woman scorned and all that. Sometimes people in her situation get desperate, make poor decisions." After he left, I sat in my quiet house and thought about desperation. Elaine was learning what it felt like to have her choices matter, to live without the safety net she'd taken for granted. It wasn't a comfortable lesson, but it was a necessary one. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You think you're so smart, we'll see." I saved the message and forwarded it to Janet Morrison. If Elaine wanted to escalate things, I'd be ready. The next morning brought news that made me smile over my coffee. Jonas burst into the office with a newspaper and a grin that could have lit up the building. "Boss, you've got to see this." He spread the local business section across my desk. The headline read, "Local security firm lands major contract with regional hotel chain." The article detailed our expansion, our new facilities, and our growing reputation in the commercial security market. It mentioned the Waverly Innovation Partnership and quoted Nora extensively about the importance of working with professionals who understand that reputation is everything in business. "We're famous," Jonas said. "We're successful. There's a difference. Same thing in this town." He wasn't wrong. Success in a place like this was measured by visibility, by who you knew and who knew you. 6 months ago, I'd been the guy who installed alarm systems for suburban housewives. Now, I was the guy who'd outsmarted a CEO and landed the biggest security contract in the region. The transformation was intoxicating. My phone rang. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. It was local. Cole Redding. Mr. Redding, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'm calling about a story we're working on regarding workplace harassment and corporate misconduct. I understand you were involved in exposing some inappropriate behavior at Waverly Innovations. I sat up straighter. I'm not sure what you mean. We've been investigating allegations of harassment and misuse of corporate resources at several local companies. Your name came up in connection with evidence that led to some terminations at Waverly Innovations. I think you have me confused with someone else. Actually, we have documentation showing that you provided security footage and other evidence that resulted in the firing of 2 employees. We'd like to get your side of the story. I could hear the hunger in her voice, the scent of a story that would generate clicks and controversy. The last thing I needed was media attention turning my private revenge into public entertainment. I'm not interested in being interviewed. Mr. Redding, we're going to run this story with or without your participation. Wouldn't you prefer to have your perspective included? My perspective is that people should be held accountable for their actions. That's all I have to say. I hung up and immediately called Janet Morrison. We have a problem, I said, and explained the situation. How much do they know? Enough to be dangerous. Someone's been talking to them, providing details about the investigation and the evidence. Someone with an axe to grind, I'm guessing. I didn't need to guess. I knew exactly who had been talking to reporters, spinning a story about harassment and manipulation. Elaine was escalating, trying to turn public opinion against me by portraying herself as a victim of my elaborate revenge scheme. Can we stop it? Not legally, but we can prepare for it. I'll draft a statement that positions everything in terms of legitimate business concerns and appropriate responses to misconduct. The key is to stay factual and avoid any appearance of personal vendetta. Even though it was a personal vendetta, Janet's laugh was dry as sandpaper, especially because it was a personal vendetta. The moment you admit that, you become the villain in their story. I spent the rest of the day preparing for a media storm that might never come. But experience had taught me that preparation was the difference between success and failure, between controlling the narrative and being controlled by it. That evening, I was grilling dinner on my back patio when I noticed a car parked across the street. Blue sedan, same one Megan had been driving. It had been there for an hour, engine running, someone sitting behind the wheel. I finished cooking, ate my dinner, and watched the car through my kitchen window. Still there at 9 o'clock. Still there at 10. At 10:30, I walked outside and crossed the street. Elaine sat behind the wheel, staring at my house like it held answers to questions she couldn't articulate. She looked terrible, thin, pale, exhausted in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. I tapped on the passenger window. She startled, then reluctantly rolled it down. This is harassment, I said quietly. This is a public street. This is you sitting outside my house for 2 hours, watching me through my windows. In legal terms, that's stalking. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Legal terms. You've become quite the expert in legal terms, haven't you? I've become quite the expert in protecting myself, something I should have done years ago. You destroyed my life, Cole. You destroyed your own life. I just documented it. She turned to face me fully, and I could see the depth of her anger, the way it had consumed everything else about her. You think you're so clever, so much smarter than everyone else. I think I'm smart enough to recognize when someone's lying to me. Apparently that makes me smarter than I used to be. I loved you. You loved what I provided. Security, stability, a nice house, a steady income. You just didn't love me enough to stay faithful. Garrett made me feel alive. He made me feel like I mattered. And what does he make you feel like now? Her face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. He won't return my calls. she whispered. He blames me for everything. Says if I hadn't been so obvious about it, we never would have been caught. Probably true. You planned this whole thing, didn't you? From the beginning, the barbecue, the timing, everything. I studied her face in the dim light from the street lamp. She needed this to be true, needed to believe that her downfall was the result of some elaborate conspiracy rather than her own poor choices. I planned to find out the truth, I said. Everything else was just letting the truth do what truth does. I don't believe you. I don't care what you believe, but I care about you sitting outside my house like some kind of stalker. Drive away, Elaine. Find somewhere else to be. Or what? Or I call Officer Martinez and have you arrested for harassment. Your choice. She stared at me for a long moment, then started the engine. This isn't over, Cole. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. I watched her drive away, then went back inside and called Martinez's direct number. She was here, I said, sitting outside my house for 2 hours. I've got security footage. I'll file a report. If it happens again, call immediately. It'll happen again. Probably, but now we'll be ready for it. I hung up and poured myself a drink, thinking about the difference between winning and being done. I'd won. There was no question about that. Elaine's life was in ruins, Garrett had lost everything, and I'd emerged stronger and more successful than ever. But being done? That was something else entirely. And looking at the empty street where Elaine's car had been parked, I realized we weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The Channel 7 news story ran on Thursday evening, and it was everything I'd feared it would be. Jennifer Walsh had crafted a narrative about corporate harassment, public humiliation, and a spurned husband's elaborate revenge scheme that painted me as a calculating villain and Elaine as a victim of my manipulation. The story featured interviews with Megan, who described me as obsessed with control and punishment, and Patricia, who claimed I'd systematically destroyed her sister's life out of spite. They'd even managed to get a quote from Garrett, calling the barbecue incident a coordinated attack designed to cause maximum public humiliation. What they didn't have was any evidence of actual wrongdoing on my part. Janet Morrison had done her job well. Every action I'd taken was legal, justified, and properly documented. But in the court of public opinion, facts mattered less than narrative, and the narrative they'd created was compelling. I watched the story from my office, Jonas beside me, both of us taking notes. Well, Jonas said when it ended, that was something. That was war, I corrected, and they just fired the first shot. My phone started ringing immediately. Reporters from other stations wanting follow-up interviews, clients asking if the allegations would affect their contracts, friends and neighbors curious about my side of the story. I let them all go to voicemail. The second call I returned was to Nora Waverly. I saw the news, she said, before I could speak. Quite a performance. Your ex-husband had some interesting things to say. Garrett always was good at playing the victim. It's one of his most refined skills. This is going to complicate things. Actually, it's going to simplify them. I've been waiting for him to make a mistake like this. What do you mean? I mean that Garrett just violated the non-disclosure agreement he signed as part of our divorce settlement. He's not allowed to discuss the circumstances of our separation with media outlets. The penalty for violation is quite severe. I felt that familiar, warm satisfaction. How severe? Severe enough to make his current situation look comfortable by comparison. I'll be filing papers tomorrow morning. After I hung up, I sat in my office and planned my next moves. The news story had been designed to damage my reputation and generate sympathy for Elaine, but it had also revealed something important. She was desperate enough to go public, which meant she was running out of options. Desperate people made mistakes. And I'd gotten very good at capitalizing on other people's mistakes. Jonas knocked on my doorframe. Boss, you might want to see this. He handed me his phone, showing a local Facebook group where the news story was being discussed. The comments were split roughly down the middle. some people expressing sympathy for Elaine, others pointing out that adultery had consequences. But what caught my attention were the comments from people who'd been at the barbecue, providing their own eyewitness accounts of what had actually happened. Mrs. Donnelly had written a particularly detailed post describing Elaine's behavior that day, complete with photos she'd taken of the evidence Nora had spread across the picnic table. "Social media," Jonas said. "The great equalizer." "The great truth-teller," I corrected. "People can spin stories for reporters, but they can't change what 30 witnesses saw with their own eyes." My phone buzzed with a text from Rick. "Saw the news? You need backup?" I typed back, "Not yet, but stay ready." The rest of the day passed quietly, but I could feel the tension building like pressure before a storm. The news story had raised the stakes, turned a private matter into public entertainment. Now everyone had an opinion, everyone was taking sides, and everyone was watching to see what would happen next. What happened next was a mistake. Friday morning, I arrived at the office to find my front windows covered with graffiti, red spray paint, crude letters spelling out liar and abuser and other creative accusations. Someone had also slashed the tires on Jonas's truck and scattered garbage across our parking lot. I called the police, then called my insurance company, then called a cleanup crew. But first, I called the security monitoring service that watched our building. "Mr. Redding? Yeah, we got everything on camera. 3 people around 2 a.m. Want us to send you the footage?" "Send it to Officer Martinez at the police department, and send me a copy." The footage was crystal clear. Elaine, Megan, and a man I didn't recognize, all wearing dark clothes and acting like amateur criminals. They'd parked 2 blocks away and walked to the building, apparently not realizing that security cameras had infrared capability. Martinez arrived within an hour, took one look at the footage, and shook his head. "Well, that's about as clear-cut as it gets. Vandalism, destruction of property, criminal mischief. Want to press charges?" "All of them. Even your ex-wife?" "Especially my ex-wife." By noon, all 3 had been arrested. The local news covered that story too, but this time the narrative was different. Hard to play the victim when you're being led away in handcuffs for vandalizing your ex-husband's business. I spent the afternoon fielding calls from clients who wanted to reassure me that the vandalism wouldn't affect their contracts. The Marriott's general manager actually increased their security budget, saying they wanted to work with someone who clearly took threats seriously. Nothing like a little criminal activity to demonstrate the value of good security systems, Jonas observed as we watched the cleanup crew finish their work. "Nothing like good planning to turn your enemy's mistakes into your advantages," I replied. That evening, I was reviewing the day's events when my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I could see Patricia standing on my porch, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "She's in jail," Patricia said without preamble. "I know, I put her there. The bail is $5,000. She doesn't have it. That's unfortunate." Patricia's composure cracked. "She's my sister, Cole. Whatever she did to you, she's still my sister. And she's still the person who chose to commit a felony rather than accept the consequences of her actions. She's desperate. She's not thinking clearly. She's thinking clearly enough to plan and execute a criminal conspiracy. That takes clarity of thought." Patricia pulled out her checkbook. "What would it take for you to drop the charges?" I stared at her, genuinely surprised. "You think this is about money?" "Everything's about money. This is about accountability. Your sister spent 8 months lying to my face, cheating on our marriage, and stealing from our joint accounts. When she got caught, instead of accepting responsibility, she tried to destroy my business and my reputation. Now, she's committed multiple felonies in an attempt to intimidate me. She made mistakes. She made choices. Bad choices, repeated choices, escalating choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences." Patricia's hands shook as she put away her checkbook. "What kind of man are you?" I'm the kind of man who learns from experience. 6 months ago, I would have forgiven her, taken her back, pretended none of this mattered. I was that kind of man once. Trusting, forgiving, willing to believe the best about people. And now? Now I'm the kind of man who protects himself and his interests. The kind of man who doesn't let people walk all over him twice. She loved you, Cole. No, she didn't. She loved what I provided. Security, stability, a comfortable life. She just didn't love me enough to stay faithful, and she doesn't respect me enough to leave me alone. Patricia left without another word, and I watched through my security system as she sat in her car for 10 minutes, probably calling lawyers or bail bondsmen or anyone else who might help her sister avoid the consequences of her actions. But there was no avoiding them now. The footage was clear, the charges were filed, and the evidence was overwhelming. Elaine had finally made a mistake she couldn't talk her way out of. Saturday morning brought the kind of clarity that comes after a storm. I woke up in my own house, made coffee in my own kitchen, and read about my ex-wife's arrest in my own newspaper. The story was front-page news in the local section, complete with mugshots and details about the vandalism. The phone calls started early, reporters wanting statements, neighbors expressing support, clients reassuring me about their continued business. I took a few of the calls, gave brief statements about being disappointed but not surprised by the escalation, and referred all other questions to my lawyer. Jonas arrived at the office with donuts and a grin. Figured today called for celebration pastries. It's not over yet. Boss, she's in jail for vandalizing our building. Her accomplices are in jail. The whole town knows she's been lying about being a victim. How much more over can it get? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Janet Morrison. Cole, we need to talk. Elaine's lawyer is offering a plea deal. What kind of deal? Guilty plea to misdemeanor vandalism, restitution for damages, and a restraining order that keeps her away from you and your business. In exchange, you don't pursue the felony charges. And if I refuse? Then we go to trial. She probably gets convicted of multiple felonies and spends the next few years in prison. I thought about it. Prison seemed like overkill, but then again, Elaine had escalated things far beyond what I'd originally planned. She'd forced this confrontation, made it public, turned it into a spectacle. What's your recommendation? Take the deal, you get what you really want, her out of your life permanently, without looking vindictive. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. The offer expires Monday morning. I spent the weekend considering my options. I could push for maximum penalties, send Elaine to prison, destroy what was left of her life completely. It would be satisfying in a way, the ultimate victory in a war she'd started. But it would also make me the kind of person I'd never wanted to become. Or I could take the deal, accept her surrender, and move on with my life. It was the practical choice, the smart choice, the choice that let me win without becoming a monster. Monday morning, I called Janet back. Take the deal. Good choice. I'll have the papers ready by noon. Janet, add one more condition. She leaves town, permanently. I don't want to see her at the grocery store or the gas station or anywhere else. She wants a fresh start? She can have it somewhere else. I'll see what I can do. The plea hearing was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. I didn't attend. Didn't want to give the media another photo opportunity or Elaine another chance to play victim. Instead, I spent the day installing a new security system for a client who'd specifically requested our services after seeing how we'd handled the vandalism incident. You've got quite a reputation now, the client said as we tested the cameras. The guy who doesn't back down doesn't get intimidated. I'm just the guy who learned to protect what's his. Same thing in this business. That evening, Janet called with the results. Elaine had accepted the deal, signed the restraining order, and agreed to relocate outside the county within 30 days. Restitution had been paid in full. Apparently, Patricia had liquidated some investments to cover the costs. It's done, Janet said. She's out of your life for good. What about Garrett? Nora's lawsuit for violating the NDA is proceeding. He'll be lucky to keep his Honda. I hung up and walked through my house, really seeing it for the first time in months. It looked different now, cleaner, more organized, more like a place where someone lived rather than somewhere someone was hiding. I'd redecorated, rearranged, made it mine in ways it had never been when Elaine lived here. The business was thriving, my reputation was solid, and my enemies had been defeated by their own poor choices. I should have felt victorious, satisfied, complete. Instead, I felt empty, not regretful. I didn't regret any of the choices I'd made or the actions I'd taken. Elaine had earned everything that had happened to her, and I'd simply been the instrument of consequences she'd created for herself. But winning, I discovered, was a lonely business. The man who'd started this journey 8 months ago, trusting, forgiving, willing to believe the best about people, was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, more successful, but also more isolated. I poured myself a drink and sat on my back patio, looking at the space where I'd held the barbecue that started it all. The picnic table was gone. I'd thrown it away the day after the confrontation, unable to look at it without remembering the photos spread across its surface. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonas. "Drinks at the quarry to celebrate?" I typed back, "Not tonight. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow would bring new clients, new installations, new opportunities to build the business I'd always wanted. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities and free from the weight of other people's deceptions. I raised my glass to the empty yard, to the absent picnic table, to the wife who was no longer my wife, and the boss who was no longer anyone's boss. To the smartest man at the barbecue, I said aloud, my voice carrying across the quiet evening air. The one who was holding the tongs. The words hung in the still air like smoke from a grill that had long since gone cold. I finished my drink, locked up the house, and went to bed in the silence of a victory that tasted like ashes. But they were someone else's ashes, and that made all the difference.